Hello, welcome to week 10. Back at it again. Before I start, I just want to say about the next 3 weeks of Viva's are going to be a series. So, it is all about the responses to the Darwinian theories in Europe, and we're going to look at traditionalism and the fin de siècle and also the aesthetic movement as well. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So let's get into it. So our question today is, how did traditionalism develop in response to the challenges of the 19th century modernism? So, although industrialization increased jobs and inspired technological innovation, it began moving away from the shared communities that existed during the medieval era, and the idea of traditionalism emerged as a reaction to industrialization and a reaction to social Darwinism. So a little historical context. Industrialization and social Darwinism and the Darwinian theories changed people's perception of history and nature and religion. In industrialization, people moved away from their small, tight-knit communities into urban industrial centers, and life and community kind of changed. And then also Darwin and his book Origin of Species really challenged the perception of religion and of science during this time. So people at this point in time were cut off from the communities and the religion that they had once known, and they needed to figure out what their new identity was going to be. And ideology became an identity for them and took the place of religion and community. And what we're focusing on today is traditionalism, which is a philosophical system that says that tradition is the only certitude. In this philosophical system of traditionalism, there is human reason is not able to know absolute truth, and the past and tradition are the only things that we can be certain of. So we lean back into that as the only certitude in life. So that's traditionalism. And the three ways that we see it as a response to the 19th century, we see it in the aesthetics, the religion, and the economics of the time. So let's talk first about the aesthetics of the traditionalist movement. And we get to talk about Romanticism, which was a movement that lasted from 1800 to 1850. And just like traditionalism goes against rationalism, Romanticism movement also pushed back on the rationalism of the Enlightenment and embraced an ancient, mysterious, and sublime world. People really wanted to just step back and feel all these emotions and just go back to the medieval world. And this movement not only impacted the aesthetic of the time, but also politics too. And it is said that, quote, art emphasized the sublime, a sort of beauty that, rather than charming the viewer, gave them a sense of awe or even fear, end quote. So this sublimeness in art can be seen through a painting by Caspar David Friedrich. You may have no idea who this guy is, but you have definitely seen his painting. because it just represents so well the Romantic era, and it is known as one of the masterpieces of the movement, and it's called The Wanderer Above a Sea of Fog. It's this guy standing with his hair blowing in the wind. He has like blonde hair. He's holding a cane, and he's standing at the edge of a cliff, and around him is this sea of fog. And this mystery and this sublimeness of the painting really sums up all the aesthetic of the traditionalist movement, wanting to move back to this mysterious and ancient time. And then, as I didn't mention this before. Anyway, we're going to talk about the Gothic revival. The Gothic era is probably my favorite era in art history, and I love the Gothic style and the architecture. It's just so beautiful. And during this traditionalist movement, one of the aesthetics that was revived from the medieval era was the Gothic style. And if you have ever walked into an old European church, Gothic church, your eyes just go up, and above you are flying buttresses, are these huge domes, this ornate, beautiful, this like architectural masterpiece. And yeah, the Gothic architecture, as Samuel Taylor Coleridge says, the principle of the Gothic architecture is infinity made imaginable. So people come back to this. They want to return. They start building Gothic architecture again, and it just shows this want for the sublime and the ancient and the medieval. So that's the aesthetic of the era that we see. And then next we're going to look at religion and how traditionalism impacted religion. So, even religion sought to return to tradition and back to its roots, and this can be seen in the Oxford movement of the 1830s, and it was a movement that began in the Church of England, and people in this movement basically argued that Anglicanism was basically Roman Catholic. And the Oxford movement really wanted to reintroduce the pre-Reformation and Catholic heritage of the church back into practice. But it was so much more as a movement than just wanting to reintroduce like smells and bells and like vestments. Like they at its core, this movement was one that was a conservative reaction against the liberalizing tendencies within the Church of England. And John Henry Newman was one of the leaders in this Oxford movement. He's an author and a really influential figure in the movement, and he really encouraged dogmatic authority of the Church of England and urged it to return to its Catholic roots. And eventually he actually converted to Catholicism, and so a lot of people in this Oxford movement were pushing to return to history and tradition. And John Henry Newman says, quote, "To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant." And connected and intertwined with the Oxford movement is the pre-Raphaelite movement, which was a movement of artists. And the reason these two are kind of connected is because a lot of the people in the pre-Raphaelite movement were also connected to the Oxford movement. So this was an artistic movement that went back and wanted to go to this neo-medieval painting style. And Dante Rossetti and his sister Christina led this movement together along with other artists of their time. And in Dante's paintings, we can see the neo-medievalist painting style that was quintessential in this movement. And then also his sister Christina Rossetti writes in The Bleak Midwinter, which a lot of people still know today. So that's the pre-Raphaelite movement. And then another movement that we have is William Morris, who is quite a guy. He was a socialist that was one of the co-founders of the arts and crafts movement, in which he argued for craftsmanship, and he argued to go back to a guild system. He's known for the pillows and fabrics that he worked on, which are all look very functional, but also they're beautiful, obviously, because he's an artist. But what Morris did and why it's important is he looked at industrialization and the move from agricultural Europe to urban Europe, and he saw this growing class divide. So in his art, he addresses that, and he addresses the poor, and he wants to change how we made things. And he said we need to return to craftsmanship and have pride in our work. And we actually see this kind of coming back today in like small companies like New Day that not New Day's not small, but like companies that use craftsmanship and this pride in their work to reach the poor and to help through this system of apprenticeship, which is kind of cool that it's coming back. But yeah, he's a socialist. His political and artistic agendas kind of go together, and he says the past is not dead. It is living in us and will be alive in the future, which we are now helping to make, which is kind of the spirit and essence of traditionalist movement. Past isn't dead. It is living in us and will be alive still. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the economics really quick on how traditionalism kind of impacted that. We have two guys, Hilary Belloc and G.K. Chesterton, who are authors from the early 20th century who are really influential. Really, really influential. I have to get this call, but I have to finish this Viva. But really influential guys who formulated a political economy. Do I get the call? It's stressing me out. No, because I don't have to pause the video. What do they want? Well, if they leave a voicemail, it's important. These two guys weren't big fans of capitalism. They also weren't big fans of socialism. They had this kind of in-between third option called distributism. And basically, distributism takes Catholic social teachings and puts them into practice in politics and economics. And the main kind of pillars of distributism are subsidiarity, which basically means higher government should not do anything that the lower governments could do. Basically, if you don't have to, don't try to control me. And then another part of the distributism of the time was solidarity. Because federal government shouldn't be telling the local government what to do, there had to be cooperation between them, and they had to work together. And then the third pillar of distributism was the respect for the human person. So this theory, political theory, kind of takes all these Catholic social teachings, brings them into politics and economics. So yeah, that is how traditionalism developed in response to the challenges of 19th century modernism. Traditionalism emerged as a response and reaction to Darwin and to industrialization, and it developed, and we can see this in aesthetics, religion, and economics. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you're